You weren't hard to love. You were just loving someone who wasn't honest about what they could give. You tried harder because you thought effort would create truth. But effort never creates honesty. It only exposes who was pretending. You didn't ask for too much. You asked for clarity, consistency, emotional presence. And instead, you were given confusion and told it was chemistry. When someone isn't honest about their capacity, they don't say it out loud. They show it in fragments, in half effort, in delayed responses, in promises that sound good, but never land. You felt it early. That subtle tension in your chest, that quiet feeling that something wasn't aligned, but you ignored it because you cared. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. Then another, then another, not because you were naive, but because you were sincere. People who are honest about their limitations don't create confusion. They create boundaries. But people who aren't ready to face themselves create emotional fog, and they let you breathe it in until you start doubting your own instincts. They didn't say, I can't show up. They said, I'm just busy. They didn't say, I'm emotionally unavailable. They said, I've just been hurt before. They didn't say, I don't know what I want. They said, I like where this is going. And you believe them because honesty sounds a lot like truth. When you wanted to be real, you weren't hard to love. You were loving someone who liked the idea of you more than the responsibility of you. There's a difference, a huge one. They liked how you made them feel seen, understood, important. But when it came time to reciprocate, to choose, to be consistent, they hesitated. That hesitation wasn't about you. It was about the truth they were avoiding. You noticed the pattern, how they leaned in when things felt light, how they pulled back when depth appeared, how they disappeared when accountability showed up. And still, you stayed because you thought love meant patience. You thought love meant giving people time. You thought love meant understanding someone's wounds, even when they were cutting you. But love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself, and patience isn't meant to be self-erasure. You weren't difficult. You were discerning. You were asking the questions that required honesty, and honesty scared them because honesty means saying, I can't meet you where you are. And they weren't ready to face that truth. So instead, they kept you close without fully choosing you. They enjoyed your presence without committing to your heart. They accepted your love without matching your effort. And slowly, you started questioning yourself. You wondered if you were asking too much, if your needs were excessive, if your depth was the problem. It wasn't. What you were experiencing was emotional misalignment. And misalignment always turns into self-doubt. When one person is honest and the other is avoidant, they didn't lie outright. They just withheld clarity, withheld intention, withheld emotional truth. And withholding is its own form of dishonesty. You kept trying to love harder, to communicate better, to explain your feelings more gently. But the truth is, you can't explain someone into readiness. You can't love someone into emotional honesty. And you can't sacrifice yourself into being chosen. They weren't confused. They were undecided because deciding would require responsibility. So they stayed comfortable and you stayed hopeful. That imbalance slowly drained you, not all at once, but quietly, in small moments where you swallowed disappointment, in conversations where you accepted less, in silences where you pretended not to feel forgotten. And still, you showed up. That's not weakness. That's loyalty. But loyalty without reciprocity turns into self-betrayal. You weren't hard to love. You were asking to be met by someone who hadn't met themselves yet. And here's the part you need to hear clearly. Their inability to be honest about their readiness does not reflect your worth. It reflects their avoidance. Some people don't reject you because you're too much. They avoid you because you're too real. You required presence, consistency, emotional maturity, and that demanded honesty. They couldn't give that without confronting themselves. So they kept you in uncertainty instead. But uncertainty isn't love, it's fear, wearing connection's clothes. And the moment you understand this, something shifts. You stop personalizing their distance. You stop romanticizing their inconsistency. You stop chasing clarity from people who survive on vagueness. You begin to see the truth. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to be honest. And that realization is where your power begins. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes from trying to love someone who won't tell you the truth, not the truth about you, the truth about themselves. They don't wake up intending to hurt you, but they wake up avoiding honesty, and avoidance always costs. The person who is willing to feel deeply, you sense the contradiction. The way their words sounded warm, but their actions stayed distant. The way they spoke about potential, but avoided commitment. The way they said they cared, yet never quite showed up when it mattered most. That inconsistency didn't confuse you because you were needy. It confused you because humans are wired to trust patterns, and their pattern kept breaking your trust. Honest people don't leave you guessing. They don't blur lines. They don't keep you in emotional limbo. They don't let you bond while they stay unaccountable. But someone who isn't ready to be honest will give you just enough to keep you attached, just enough vulnerability to feel close, just enough affection to feel chosen, just enough hope to keep you waiting. And waiting slowly changes you. You start anticipating instead of receiving. You start hoping instead of knowing. You start adjusting instead of being. You began to monitor yourself, your tone, your needs, your expectations. You wondered if asking for clarity made you demanding, if wanting consistency made you intense, if expecting honesty made you difficult. But needing honesty doesn't make you complicated. It makes you emotionally healthy. Emotionally healthy people notice when something doesn't align. They feel it in the body first, in the tight chest, in the restless sleep, in the way peace disappears. Even when things seem fine, your anxiety wasn't a flaw. It was feedback. You were reacting to emotional unpredictability, to someone who said one thing and lived another, to someone who wanted closeness without responsibility. That creates cognitive dissonance. Your heart tries to bond, your intuition tries to warn you, and you end up stuck between hope and self-protection. So you tried to communicate gently, patiently, thoughtfully. You used I feel statements. You gave space. You softened your needs. But honesty doesn't emerge because you explain better. It emerges when someone is ready to face themselves. They weren't. And instead of admitting that, they let you do the emotional labor of holding the connection together. They let you carry the uncertainty. They let you absorb the silence. They let you wonder what you did wrong instead of telling you they weren't ready to do right. That's not love. That's emotional outsourcing. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for certainty about forever. You were asking for truth. In the present moment, where are we? How do you feel? What are you actually capable of giving? Those questions aren't pressure, they're clarity. And clarity terrifies people who survived by staying undefined. So they avoided the conversation, changed the subject, got defensive, pulled away, or reassured you without changing behavior. And reassurance without change is manipulation, even if it's unconscious. You kept giving grace because you saw their wounds, because you understood their past, because you believed. Love meant patience, but patience without boundaries teaches people they don't have to be honest with you. And over time, that erodes your self-trust. You stop listening to your instincts. You override your discomfort. You normalize emotional absence. You begin to believe that love always hurts, that effort must be proven, that consistency is rare. It isn't. It's just unfamiliar. When you've been loving people who aren't ready, you weren't hard to love. You were asking to be met in emotional reality, and they preferred emotional ambiguity because ambiguity lets them feel close without committing. It lets them enjoy connection without accountability. It lets them leave without confrontation. But you don't thrive in ambiguity. You never did. You thrive in truth. That's why this hurts so deeply. Not because you lost them, but because you lost yourself, trying to hold space for someone who wouldn't be honest about their limits. And the moment you see this clearly, you stop blaming yourself. You stop replaying conversations. You stop wondering what you could have done differently. Because the truth settles in. Nothing you did wrong could have made them ready. Readiness is an internal decision. Honesty is an internal choice. And love can't grow where truth is avoided. The shift doesn't happen all at once. It starts quietly, with one moment where you pause before explaining yourself. One moment where you notice you're tired of justifying your needs. That pause is self-trust. Waking up, you begin to see how often you bent to keep the connection alive, how often you softened truths to avoid making them uncomfortable, how often you carried emotional weight that wasn't yours to hold. You weren't compromising. You were compensating for their avoidance, for their lack of clarity, for their fear of naming reality. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You stop asking why they didn't choose you. You start asking why you stayed when you weren't being met. That question isn't self-blame, it's self-awareness. You realize you were loyal to the version of them you hoped they would become, not the version they actually were. And hope is powerful, but hope without honesty keeps you stuck. You begin to notice how honesty feels in your body. It feels calm, grounded, clear. There's no guessing, no emotional whiplash, no internal negotiations about whether you're asking too much. That's when it clicks. Love doesn't require constant explanation. Love doesn't ask you to shrink your needs. Love doesn't make you doubt your emotional intelligence. What you felt before wasn't intensity, it was anxiety created by inconsistency. And inconsistency is not passion, it's instability. You stop romanticizing their distance. You stop translating silence into meaning. You stop filling in the blanks they refuse to address. Silence becomes information. Distance becomes data. Avoidance becomes clarity. You no longer chase conversations. You observe behavior. You no longer seek reassurance. You notice patterns. And the pattern is simple. Someone who isn't honest will always keep you guessing, because guessing keeps them safe from responsibility. But you're no longer willing to live in emotional limbo. You realize how much energy you spent trying to be understood by someone who wasn't listening, trying to be chosen by someone who wouldn't decide, trying to be loved by someone who enjoyed connection but avoided commitment. And that realization hurts, but it also liberates. Because now, you stop negotiating with reality. You accept it. They weren't ready. Not for depth, not for consistency, not for emotional accountability. And that truth no longer feels like rejection. It feels like information. Information that sets you free. You begin to reclaim yourself. Your standards stop apologizing. Your boundaries stop trembling. Your voice becomes steady again. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-giving. You stop over-investing in people who under-deliver. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Clarity doesn't make you less loving. It makes your love precise. You understand now. You don't need to convince someone to be honest with you. You need to choose people who already are. And once you choose honesty, your nervous system relaxes. Your heart softens. Your self-respect strengthens. You begin to trust yourself again. And that trust changes who you attract. You no longer connect with potential. You connect with reality. And reality feels safer than hope ever did. What you feel now is not bitterness. It's clarity. And clarity is quiet. You no longer need answers from them because you finally gave yourself the truth. They never could. You see it clearly now. They weren't overwhelmed by you. They were confronted by themselves. Your needs didn't scare them. Your honesty did. Because honesty demands response. And they preferred comfort over courage. You stop replaying memories, looking for proof that it was real. It was real to you. And that's enough. But now you understand something deeper. Real love doesn't require you to self-abandon. It doesn't live in ambiguity. It doesn't survive on hope alone. Real love is grounded. It's mutual. It's emotionally accountable. You no longer feel the urge to explain your depth to people who live on the surface. You no longer apologize for wanting consistency. You no longer negotiate your intuition because you've seen what happens when honesty is missing. You recognize the early signs now, the vagueness, the future talk without follow-through, the emotional closeness paired with behavioral distance. You don't demonize it. You don't chase it. You simply step back. You understand. Someone can care about you and still be incapable of loving you well. And that truth no longer breaks your heart. It protects it. You don't close yourself off. You refine. You become selective with your energy, intentional with your vulnerability. You give your heart to people who speak clearly, who show up consistently, who don't need to be translated. And something incredible happens. Your body relaxes. Your nervous system settles. Love feels calm again. Not boring, not flat, but safe. Safe enough to grow. Safe enough to deepen. Safe enough to be real. You stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. You stop confusing anxiety for passion. You stop calling inconsistency chemistry. You choose honesty every time because honesty doesn't keep you guessing. It keeps you grounded. And now, when someone isn't ready, you don't take it personally. You don't try to change them. You don't make it mean something about your worth. You simply recognize misalignment and you walk away with your dignity intact. You weren't hard to love. You were asking for truth. And the right person will never make you feel like honesty is too much. They will meet you with presence, with clarity, with emotional courage. And when that happens, you'll feel it immediately. No confusion, no hesitation, no self-doubt, just peace. That's how you know you're finally home.